All right, good afternoon, guys. So today we're going to talk about the OTC trade life cycle. Okay. Now, if I were to ask you, so let me ask you guys, what are the products and instruments that trade in the OTC market? You can unmute yourself or you can drop it in the chat. Okay, yeah, swaps, forwards. What else? Yeah, correct. Forwards and swaps. What else is there? Options. Options also trade in OTC. Okay. FX, okay, but FX, yeah, so your normal FX is OTC, it doesn't trade on an exchange. And also you have FX derivatives, okay, like FX forwards, FX options, FX swaps, etc. Okay, but you are right, is when you generalize it, right, it is a forward, a swap, and an option that trades in the OTC market, okay, and plus you have others as well, okay, what we call as structured products. So today, what we're going to specifically talk about is the OTC derivative market. Okay, so we have last week we talked largely about exchange and what happens, and most of you guys are aware about what happens on a stock exchange. Okay, but today we'll focus a bit on the OTC derivative market specifically. Okay, and we will talk about what happens in the OTC derivative market. Okay, so when you look at the OTC trade life cycle, right, basically what we're looking at is, for example, a forward contract. What happens to a forward contract from trade initiation to trade settlement? Okay, that's what we're going to look at. Okay, now when we look at forward with the OTC derivative market, right, can anybody trade in OTC derivatives? Can you and I trade in OTC derivatives? OTC derivatives, Vipul, not equity exchange ETD, not exchange traded derivatives, but over the counter derivatives. True, it's really hard for retail investors. Okay, so let me clarify one thing. Okay, retail investors, you and I, we are actually not eligible to trade in the OTC derivative market. Okay, internationally especially. Okay, I don't think even in India it allows retail investors to trade. Okay, but what I'm talking specifically here is about your Western markets, European and US markets. Okay, so retail investors cannot trade in OTC derivatives. Okay, now the main reason for that is these derivative contracts, right, they're actually incredibly complex, and the kind of losses that you could incur, right, are massive. Okay, okay. Oh, okay. But XM and IG brokers allow us trade, but and OTC. But Vibhor, the CFDs and all of that, right? That's anyway FX, right? And when you say OTC markets, what can you trade in that with IG brokers? But these are not local brokers, right? These are international brokers. Yeah. Okay. But do they allow retail investors to trade in OTC? But I think they take the obligation on themselves, right? Okay, cool. Okay. All right. But I'm guessing it's supremely risky for you when you trade in these markets. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, true. Risk reward. Yeah. I will catch up with you one of these days. Conversation is due. Okay. So, so let's you know keep it simple in terms of, generally the retail investor is not allowed to trade in the OTC derivative market because the risks associated with it is extremely high. Okay. Now, in order to trade in the OTC derivative market, right, a financial institution or a corporate or corporation or corporate, right, has to be a member of an organization called as ISDA. It's pronounced as ISDA, and ISDA stands for International Swaps and Derivatives Association. Okay, so if you want to trade in the OTC derivative market, right, you need to be a member of ISTA. Again, we're specifically talking about the Western world here, basically the European markets and the US markets. If you want to trade there, you need to be a member of ISTA. Okay, is this part clear with everyone? So your forwards, options, swaps, etc., right? You cannot trade them until and unless you're a member of ISTA. Okay, now how do you become a member of ISTA? Is that it is well, quite complex, because one of the basic requirements to trade in the OTC derivative market is that you, as a company, as a corporation, or as a financial institution, right, you should have a capital of more than 1 billion US dollars, okay, minimum. So if you have $1 billion and above, you can apply to become a member in ISDA. Okay, now because we're talking about $1 billion, right? That basically discounts 99.99% of the world population, and that's why most retail investors cannot and will not trade in the OTC derivative market. Okay, now a couple things is that again, the full form is what? International Swaps and Derivatives Association. So what does an association mean generally? Yeah, it means a group of people. Okay, so one thing that I want to clarify with ISDA is that it is not a regulator. Okay, it's not a regulator. Okay, so what happened was that, and why ISDA was created, right, is we need to go back to the mid 1980s. Basically, the OTC market has been around for a long time, okay, but it became started to become really popular in the 80s and especially in the 90s. The OTC derivative market really became huge. Okay, up until then, everything was on an exchange because the risks associated with OTC derivatives, right, was extremely high. So most of the big financial institutions would largely trade on the exchange. Okay. Now, what happened was that with the when we talk about ISDA, basically the investment banks, right, at that time came together and basically said, you know what, we love trading in the OTC derivative OTC market. We have a lot of flexibility. We can customize. We don't have to be worried about a regulator. We don't have to be worried about, some other person making a massive loss and then they blaming us. We don't want to worry about all of that. So what they did was that but however, the problem was, when we talk about the OTC derivative market, was the settlement part, the operational side of the OTC derivative market. That's where there are a lot of issues. Okay, now if you guys remember, in a CDS contract, right, we said that a credit event is a moratorium, or and it's a bankruptcy, or what is it, it's what else, failure to pay. Okay, now quite a few incidences started happening in the OTC derivative market where, let's say that you and I entered into a forward contract. Okay, I'm just giving you guys a simple example. And let's say it was to buy 50,000 shares of IBM. So IBM has been around a long time. Okay, now let's say that in the 80s, right? So I bought IBM share. So I'm the buyer, you're the seller, and suddenly IBM takes a massive loss. The stock price just drops very badly, and I, as your counterparty, right, on the settlement date, might refuse to pay you, saying, "Hey, you know what? I just took a massive loss on that deal. No chance. I'm not going to pay you." Now, is this fair for you as the person who's going to benefit from my mistake? Right? It's not at all, right? And that's what started happening was that counterparties would default on their payments. And in the 80s as well, there was a financial crisis. Okay, again, real estate bubble again. So one of the things that you guys can keep a track of, right? The real estate market keeps crashing every 30 years. So in the 80s, late 80s, right, there was uh, a real estate bubble. Same thing happened in 2007. Okay, same thing will happen in another 20 years from now. Okay, so that's a, and if you guys look at it historically, right, on an average, every 30 years there is a real estate bubble. Okay, so now all this, so you and I enter into a forward contract, and then I want to settle the transaction, but you know what? I'm taking a massive loss on it, and I don't want to pay. Now, because it's a forward contract, both of us are obligated, right? And we've not really put any collateral and all that. I can happily run away from this deal, and you would be sitting on a huge loss, right? So that is why the investment banks came together, and what they did was that they formalized the terms and conditions of derivative contracts. Okay, they formalized the terms and conditions of derivative contracts so that if there was any issue, okay, because there is no regulator said that, you know what, we don't want to get involved in the OTC derivative market, it's your headache. So in case there was any issue between you and I, right, what we would end up, and that's why we created ISDA, was that it would help solve our disputes. So that is why it's known as a association. Okay, is this part clear with everyone? Okay, so ISDA is not a regulator, it is an association. And what they did was that they standardized the terms and conditions of derivative contracts. Okay, is this clear with everyone? Okay, all right, take a minute and write this down, and then we'll move on to the steps. Yeah, Dipesh, Wirecard, yes, massive fraud, 2 billion missing. So, but you know what? The funny thing is that the stock price crashed. It came all the way to zero, but then the stock price shot up again, saying that we still can do something or whatever. I don't know. But yeah, I heard about that Wirecard fraud. And the funny thing is, I think PwC or KPMG were the auditors. They washed their hands of it. They did not. What do you call it, take responsibility for missing that 2 billion. Yeah, so 2 billion is a lot of money. Yeah, actually, let me know when you guys are done. I have a question that I want to ask you guys, and I want to see whether you guys understand it. Yeah, yeah. So in my personal experience, right, when we talk about, so again, nothing against any company, and please don't, the thing is that um, the way I believe the PwC audit, right? Generally, when I've gone through a lot of audits in my experience, no, I think it was PwC in it. Um, what happens is that for the audit, right, generally very junior guys come to do the first round of audit and do all the data collection and all of that. And just because they have a CA or an MBA from some fancy college, right? uh, they think that they can mess with us or whatever it is. But we well, back then we used to be like super aggressive, right? So we used to not really take any nonsense from them, and we should just give the data. And if they had any and they didn't know how to ask the right questions. Okay, so one of the big things, right, of being an auditor is the ability, and not only an auditor, right? If you guys want to move up in your career, one of the biggest skills that you guys need to develop is asking the right questions. And when you ask the right questions, you get the right answers, right? So, and I think largely what happens, right, is they send quite a bit of junior people to do the initial round of auditing. And until unless the junior guys find something major, right, then only it'll get highlighted. But if they don't, right, they just report everything was okay, and then the head guy will have a look at it once. And if everything looks good, they just say yes. Yeah. So auditing, has kind of lost its uh, like there's still a lot of good auditors and they're good people. I'm not saying that. It's just that the way certain companies do it, right? You can easily fool them, and they don't have the intelligence to actually uh, find a mistake. Yeah. So, all right, everybody done writing? Okay. Now let me. So a little off topic. I don't know if I've asked you guys this question. Okay. So this is $1 billion. Have I asked you this question? I don't think so, right? All right. So today, I think you guys, all of you will actually understand what is money. Okay. So when I learned this from my teacher, right, I actually could not sleep for a couple of days. Okay. Now let me ask you guys a question. What does it mean to have $1 billion? Okay. Now let's say right now today banks are open. Right now you get an SMS saying $1 billion equivalent to rupees, okay, has been credited to your account. What will you do? So please use your imagination. So and you can be fun. It's fine. What would you do if you got a message right now? So 1 billion is how much in terms of rupees? So if you multiply that into 75 rupees, right? It's a huge amount. Okay, now you're going to report it. Okay, invest it and double it. Okay, but Annette, let's say that well, let's just use our imagination. Let's not report it and all of that. Anyway, if such a huge amount comes in, then banks will obviously freeze it. But let's say that $1 billion just comes to your account. What is the first thing that you do? Correct, Ganesh. I would do the same thing. But Ganesh, would you tell your family or not? First question, Ganesh. You would. Okay. Uh, Biswajit, you and I have the right idea. So one of my life goals, right? I don't know if it'll happen, but something to hope for is I want to buy an island, and I want to name myself a king. Name myself, and oh no, sorry, I want to be the king of an island. That's one of my life goals, right? So I want to own a small island, and I want to be king of that island. That's what I want. Yeah. Okay, you'll not say I'll surprise them with buying great things, but then they're going to ask you, Deepesh, where did you get that money and all of that. Now, if I were to ask you, now most of us will spend this money, right? Now, if you had $1 billion, how long will it take you to run out of it? How long will it take you to finish it? Will it take you a couple of hours, couple of days, 1 minute? Wow, okay. A minute, okay. Okay, so 1 minute on one side of the thing. What about the rest of you? A second. Wow, Rahul. What is worth 1 billion that you can place an order and execute? Yeah. Okay. Cool. But you should have fun with this, right? So 1 second, 1 minute. What else? What else? 1 day, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. How long would you take to finish $1 billion? Okay, 2 days to believe, 1 hour to spend. That's a good point, Imraj. 5 years. Okay. All right. Cool. Now, let me add an additional thing. Now, let's say that $1 billion came to your account, okay? And every day at midnight, $10,000, okay? Now, $10,000 is what? It's 7,50,000 rupees. Every day at midnight, let's see, every day at midnight, this amount gets credited, okay? Every day at midnight, 7.5 lakhs, 10,000. That's pretty good, right? 10,000. So you use, you don't use, you get $10,000 every day. That's pretty good, right? So you use it, don't use it, it's fine. You get $10,000 every day out of your $1 billion. Okay. Now, if I structure it this way, right? How long will it take you to finish $1 billion? So you can, every day it's coming to you, so you can spend it, you don't have to spend it. But now it takes a little bit more amount of time, right? Maybe instead of 5 years, it might take you 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. Yeah. And is that fair? Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, let me tell you guys what is the secret of money. So if you had $1 billion and spent $10,000 every day, okay, it will take you 273 years to finish. Will you be alive for this entire 273 years? Would you be alive for all these 273 years? In this, maybe 30, 40 years max. Okay, but if you had $1 billion and you spent $10,000 every day, right? It'll take you 273 years to actually finish it. Yeah. So 1 billion divided by 10,000, I believe, should get you, yeah, should get you to 273 years. Yeah. Now, what is the net worth of Jeff Bezos? Can anyone tell me? Mm, 150 billion into 273 years. Now, do you think Jeff Bezos is really worried about becoming poor? Do you really think he's really worried about that? Okay. So here's what I've actually learned. See, all of us want to be rich, okay? But the problem with becoming rich is that you can instantly become poor. Rather, what we all need to do, that includes me as well, is not to become rich, but you need to become wealthy. And when you become wealthy, right, the assets that you own will generate money for you and you don't have to worry about it, right? So this is what it means to be extremely wealthy. So that is why, if you look at it, right, it's the top 1% of the world who owns 99% of the money. Yeah, like the Rothschild family, yes. And by the way, the Rothschild, so I don't know if you guys have heard of the Rothschild family. They basically created the entire banking sector and banking infrastructure in Europe. Yeah, yeah, true. Yeah, but and here's the thing, right? The Rothschild family and all that, right? Only if you specifically Google them, you will find out information about them. Otherwise, if you say top the richest people on the planet, you will get Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, all these guys. Okay, but these guys are a super secretive family. Yeah, yeah. Time value of money on his net worth, then doesn't really have to this thing. Okay, so now, are you guys now understanding that $1 billion, right, is not a small amount of money? Okay, and you guys, when you start working, right, and when market crashes and all that, right, they'll say 10 billion was lost in the market and all that. Okay, I'll be thinking, 10 billion, no big deal. No, no, it's a huge deal, right? Because in the 2008 financial crisis, right, close to $400 billion of money was wiped out because of the 2008 financial crisis. Okay, so that's a lot of money. But now I hope that you guys understand that when somebody says that, you know, they're a billionaire, right, you actually understand what that means in terms of time, right? So if you had $1 billion right now, you basically don't have to worry for the next 3 to 5 generations. Okay. All right, so this was just a little bit of trivia so that you guys understand this idea of money. Because a lot of us have a very, what do you call it, different understanding of money because why? Because you keep hearing such huge numbers, right? You think it's not a lot of money, but $1 billion, right, is a lot of thing. It's a huge amount of money, okay? And $1 billion, right, could solve a lot of the world's problems as well. Okay. All right. So, are we clear with? Now, let's come back to topic. Okay. So, are we clear of what are the products that trade on the OTC? Then, so we'll talk about the steps now, and what is ISDA and what does it do? Are we clear with this? Okay, cool. Okay. So now let's look at the steps in the OTC trade life cycle. Okay. Now, the steps are largely going to be the same, but at a certain point, we will deviate from what you guys know from the exchange trade life cycle. Okay. So, as an example, right, we will talk about a forward contract. Okay. So, we'll use a forward contract as an example and we will run through the OTC trade life cycle. Okay. All right. Now, you are a buy forward and I am a sell forward. Okay, so you are the one who's buying the forward contract, I'm the one selling the forward contract. So in this case, you are the client and I'm the broker or I'm the investment bank. Okay, now you want to buy 10,000 shares of Microsoft at $165 for a 10-month delivery or a physical settlement. Okay. Now, I don't know if you guys know about this, but forward contracts are generally traded maximum up to 1 year. They don't trade beyond that. Okay. So for contract, irrespective of the underlying asset, right? They generally trade up to 1 year. Okay. Now, in this case, you want to buy 10,000 shares of Microsoft at 165, 10 months from now, and it is a physical settlement. Now, what do we mean by physical settlement? Exactly. You will take the delivery of the underlying asset. Okay. So I will deliver the 10,000 shares of Microsoft to your custody account. Okay. Now, let's say that since you're the client, right, you come to me and you want to place an order. That's known as trade initiation. Okay. So again, like I mentioned, it'll be the same. Okay. Now, what can happen is that you as a client can approach me as an investment bank, and I can act as a broker to the transaction. Okay, not I can, or I will act as a broker to the transaction. So that's known as trade initiation or placement of order. Next part, the second step is trade execution, which is agreement of order. Now here, the investment bank can find a counterparty to the trade, and the trade details will be agreed by everyone. So what this means is that, see, in OTC derivatives, I as the investment bank can act as a counterparty to your trade. Okay, I can act as a broker to your trade, or I can be both. Okay. Now, what do I mean by a counterparty to your trade? Means if you're buy forward, I'll be sell forward. I'm willing to take that risk. Okay. Now, that is a counterparty. Now, if I'm a broker, that means I found somebody else. So if you're CIBOP 90, I found CIBOP 91 who's willing to do the deal for you. Okay, so then I act as a broker or middleman between both of you. Okay, or I can act as both as well. Okay, so that's what we mean by trade execution or agreement of order. And the third step is trade capture, where we're going to record all the details in the risk management system. Okay, is this part clear with everyone? So largely the steps are going to be the same, but there will be a bit of deviation, and we'll talk about the deviation in some time. Okay, but are we clear on what is happening on the first three steps of the trade life cycle? So trade initiation, trade execution, and trade capture. Is this clear with everyone? All right, great. Okay, so again, to repeat, you are a client, I am investment bank. You want to buy 10,000 shares of Microsoft at 165, 10 months from now, and physical delivery. Okay, so when you come and approach me and place an order, that is known as trade enrichment, sorry, trade initiation. Trade execution is agreement of order. So here two things can happen. I can act as a counterparty to the trade, or I can act as a broker to the trade where I find somebody else. Okay, so that is trade execution. And finally, we have trade capture, where you record the details in the RMS tool. Okay, risk management system. Okay, take a minute to write this down, and then we'll move on to middle office.
Sir, sir, I am audible to you.
Yeah, Deepesh, go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah, yeah.
Sir, so between So between the buyer and the seller, there is investment banks who acts as a broker.
Exactly.
Okay, so sir, it's in point one, client approaches an investment in banks, and the buyer is go to the investment in banks to buy the forwards.
Yeah, by the
It
forward.
means okay, and the seller, as you are, contact the investment banks to sell the forwards.
Sorry, say it again.
Sir, and as you are a seller,
Mhm.
you will also go to the investment banks to sell your forwards.
No, 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 no. I myself am I am an investment bank, so I will act as a broker. So what I'm saying
You
is
are
that
investment banks or you are seller.
yeah, I'll be the seller.
Okay, so sir, there is a investment banks between both of the parties.
Huh. It could be.
Okay. So sir, in point one, who is broker?
No, so that's what I'm saying. Is that if you're the client, and see, we were talking about derivatives here. So investment banks generally act as a broker. It will not be like a retail investor. So so
Okay,
you're the client. I am the broker. Okay, that is so when you place an order with me, okay, that is trade initiation. But I as a broker can do two things. One is I can agree to take this risk of this trade, where I can be the counterparty to the trade, or I can go find somebody else to be the counterparty for the trade.
okay. So somebody else is investment in banks.
It can be another investment bank, it can be another financial institution, it can be another corporation, it can be anyone.
Okay, 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 sir. Thank you.
No problem. Let me know when you guys are done, and then we'll move on to middle office. Okay, cool. Okay, before I'll check that about the brokers online. Okay, cool. All right. Now we've done the middle office. I mean, sorry, front office work. Okay, initiation, execution, and capture. Okay. So now what happens next is largely going to be same that's been taught to you guys in exchange. Okay. So what happens in middle office? The first step is anybody. Exactly. So trade enrichment. Okay. Now, what are we going to do in trade enrichment? Again, it's the same thing. You're going to add the economic and non-economic details to the trade. Okay. So when we talk about economic details, you're going to calculate the commission on the trade. And when it's non-economic details, you're going to add the bank account number and custodian account number. Okay. Now, in trade validation, you're going to do a trade, trader, and counterparty check. Now, here in counterparty check, you're going to check whether the client or counterparty is a member of ISDA or not. Okay, that's your trade validation. And then again, we have trade verification where we're going to compare the details with the trade sheet. Okay. Now, up till here, till trade verification, right? The details are the same. Now, in OTC trade lifecycle, we're going to add an additional step, and that's called as affirmation. Okay. It's pronounced as affirmation. Okay. Now, when we talk about affirmation, what this means is that when you and I enter into a OTC derivative contract, right? It is a highly customized contract, so whatever we can imagine, we create that contract and we agree to the terms and conditions. Okay, but what happens is that because this is not traded on exchange and ISDA is not a regulator, right? What ends up happening is that the investment bank or the broker has to create a trade confirmation. They have to create a document, a confirmation document saying that this is the details of the OTC transaction. Okay, so what happens is that before we can create that legally binding agreement, right? Before we can create that agreement, what we need to do is that we need to reconfirm all the trade details with the counterparty or client. Okay. Now, when you talk about affirmation, you're only going to send the economic details. Okay. What is that economic details? Direction, quantity, underlying asset, price, time period, and type of settlement. Okay. You're only going to do this much. Okay. Now, generally, what happens is that you would send this information either on an email or an electronic platform. Okay. So once you as a client, you affirm the transaction, right? Saying that, yes, I agree to the details. Then I can draft what we call as a ISDA agreement. Okay, is that clear with everyone? So enrichment, validation, verification, those steps remain the same. But in affirmation, what we're going to do is that before I create the agreement, okay, because if you remember derivatives, it's an agreement between two parties, right? Before I create that agreement and send it to you, I want to ensure that I have the details correctly. Now, once you affirm those details, right, then only will I create the ISDA agreement. Okay, is this part clear with everyone? I know not yet. Let me finish with the back office side and then I'll link everything together. But at least got a fair understanding of what is the affirmation. Yes, no? Don't worry, I'll explain a little bit more, but please finish writing the middle office steps. Yeah, so Ganesh, let's finish writing the middle office steps, and then I'll explain it again.
Sir, am I audible to you?
Yeah, Deepesh, go ahead.
Sir, if I am buyer or seller of the derivative contract, that I should be the member of ISDA.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Let me know when you're done writing. Okay. So good question. I think it is the agreed price. Like on the day you enter into the forward contract, they calculate the commission. Then they don't calculate it on the forward price because see the forward price, you can technically have it as anything. So generally, whatever is the agreed price today, so whatever we saw $165 for MSFT, that is what you will use to calculate the commission. All right. Everybody done? Three, only three so far. Okay. Quickly write this. Okay. Now let's talk about core operations. Okay. Then I'll link the affirmation step and the with the core operations side. Okay. Now in core operations or back office, right? Um, the first step again is trade confirmation. Now here, what we're going to do is that we're going to draft the ISDA agreement. Okay, we're going to draft the ISDA agreement, and both the front office of the client, okay, of the client and the broker uh, will have to sign it. Yeah, yeah, Deepesh, I'll come to it. Okay, I'll link it together. I'll recap. Just give me 1 minute because then the entire flow gets missed. Okay, so in so after affirmation is done, right, you'll do trade confirmation. Okay, where basically you'll draft the ISDA agreement and both the front office of the client and investment bank have to sign it. That's your trade confirmation. Then you have settlement and recap and reconciliation. Okay, now let me make you guys understand this trade confirmation a little bit more. Okay, sorry, affirmation a little bit more. Okay, now I'll give you guys a simple example. Okay, now all of you know I mean, all of you guys understand how renting works, right? How do you rent a home? All of you guys understand that, right? The basic concept of it, right? So you hire a broker. Now, what will the broker's job be? To go and find uh, houses as per your requirement, right? Now, let's say that the broker finds a house as per your requirement. You go see the house. Okay, what will you generally do after you see the house? If you like it, you will talk to the owner and you will negotiate the the rent, the advance, maintenance, no maintenance, etc. You're going to do all of that, right? Now, generally, what happens is that the person renting it should create the rental agreement, right? You all know what a rental agreement is, right? So it is the responsibility of the tenant to create the rental agreement. Now, let's say that you had a conversation with the owner and you did not write down any of the details. You think, okay, you know what, my memory is sharp, I'll remember everything. And 1 week later, you go to the notary to get the rental agreement done. Okay, you go to the notary to get the rental agreement done, and the guy there, right? Will he ask you what type of rental agreement you want? What do you guys think? Do they ask you what type of rental agreement you want, or what are they going to generally ask you? What do you think they'll ask you guys? Come on. Right. But do they ask you generally about the what kind of rental agreement do you want? No, right? Because rental agreements are what? They are standardized, right? So if all of us stood in a line, the rental agreement, the terms and conditions of the rental agreement will be the same. Yes or no? Right? So all the details, the terms and conditions of the rental agreement for all of us if we stood in line would be the same. But what will keep changing is the details of the transaction, right? So the name of the owner will be different, the ID proofs will be different, the rental amount, the advance you have to pay, all of that is different, right? So when we talk about this, right? Ideally, what will you do once you have negotiated with the owner? You will write down all the details of the owner, of yourself, and what you have agreed. Okay, and what are you going to do? You're going to put it on a piece of paper. You're going to write down, okay, owner's name, his address or her address. Maybe they live in a different house. Okay, it's not the same house. Their telephone number, their the rental amount and the advance, everything. You put it on a piece of paper and you show it to that person. Right now, why will you show it to this person? Is that they have to see that both of you, whatever was discussed, you put it on a piece of paper, and both of you are agreeing to those details. Now, that piece of paper, is it legally binding? That piece of paper with just the details and no signature, is that legally binding? No. Good. So it's not legally binding. Okay. So what have you just done is you've done what we call as affirmation. You've written the details of the transaction down and you showed it to your owner. Okay. Now you take this piece of paper and you go to the notary and you give this piece of paper to that person, and what will they do? They'll type up all the information, right? They'll type everything up, and if you now take the rental agreement with the right information, will your owner sign it or no? Exactly, they will sign it, right? But now, if you did not do affirmation, if you did not write everything on a slip of paper and you trusted your memory to remember everything, but you go 1 week later and you give the wrong details to the notary person and they type it up and you give it to your landlord, will the landlord sign the agreement? Yeah. Okay, good. No, obviously not, right? So now are you guys getting this idea? Is that in financial markets, in OTC trade life cycle, why do you do affirmation? Is because you don't have an exchange, you don't have a third party to compare the details with. Okay, these are bilateral agreements, it's between two people. Okay, so what are you doing in affirmation step is that you're sending them an email saying that, hey, we just did a forward contract today, do you agree to these details, yes or no? Now if it is yes, the affirmation team will send the details to the confirmation team. Now because the details trade economics is correct, will it now be easy to create a ISDA agreement? Exactly. And if the details in the agreement are correct, won't the client sign it and won't the front office guy also sign it? Yeah. So are you guys getting why you have to do affirmation? Because now, for example, now let's say I remove this step and we go directly to trade confirmation. Now, see, you have to understand there is no exchange, there's no clearinghouse, there is no third source to compare your information with. Now, what if I have one set of details and you have another set of details? And let's say that I created the ISDA agreement and I gave it to you. Would you sign it if the details were wrong? Obviously not, right? So that is why trade affirmation is important, because before creating the agreement, both of us are acknowledging that these are the details of the transactions that we've entered into. Is this clear with everyone? So we are doing affirmation to check to ensure that both of us have the right details, so that when we create the ISDA agreement, there's not going to be a problem in signing it. Yes? No? Is this clear with everyone? Deepesh, is it clear with you now? Yeah? So that is why we do affirmation. Okay? We have to ensure that, and look, we're only looking worried about these things, these details. Only the trade economics. Now, let's take a look at this. Now, if you and the front office person had agreed for this, but instead of physical settlement, we put cash settlement, would you sign it? Or would I sign it? Would you sign it if this anything changed in this? So, for example, let's say actually it was physical settlement. Now, instead, I say it's cash settlement. Now, if there was this mistake, we would capture it before we did confirmation, right? Then what would you do? You would come back to me and say, hey, no, Rakshit, as per my front office, the settlement of this contract is a physical settlement. We have discrepancy. Can you please check? So then I will go back to my front office and I'll ask them to clarify, front office guy, is this a physical settlement or is it a cash settlement? Because client has different information. So the front office guy, they will review their details and they'll confirm, yeah, hey, it's my mistake, right? It's not cash settlement, it is physical settlement only. Please change. So this is why we're doing affirmation, so that this confirmation process is seamless. Okay. Now, back in the day, right, like 10, 15 years ago, all these ISDA agreements, right, were done manually. Okay. When I say done manually, right, the templates were already there, but you had to copy paste and you had to what is it, you had to copy paste all that information, make sure that everything is correct, blah blah blah. And it used to take anywhere between 2 to 21 days. It used to take anywhere between 2 to 21 days. Now imagine you worked on a confirmation for 20 days. and the affirmation was not done, would you be very happy to redo 20 days worth of work? Right? Exactly. So this is why you do affirmation, to ensure that both client and broker, or client and counterparty, have the right details, so that when they create the ISDA agreement, it will be signed without a problem. Good question, Annette. Yes, it is a legally binding document to fulfill the contract. Okay. Now, how do we mitigate default risk, right? Is We will talk about this later in the end of level two, is that you will deposit a collateral with me when we come close to settling the transaction. So that is how we will mitigate our default risk, when you deposit collateral either equivalent or above the value of the transaction. Okay, is this clear with everyone in terms of what is affirmation and confirmation? And I want you guys to spend like 1 minute and write it in your own words, okay? And an example that is easy to understand, right, is rental agreements, and why you need to write down the details before you go to the notary to actually create a rental agreement. Okay, is this fine with everybody? So, Annette, when we talk about the ISDA agreement, right? It's just an agreement, that it is a legally binding agreement that you enter into. Now, within the ISDA agreement, there are terms and conditions for, because there is no regulator and there is no exchange, clearinghouse, etc., right? You can define the type of collateral uh, that you have to meet in during the settlement stage, right? You have to define the collateral that you're going to put, so that it you reduce your default risk. No, so Annette, see, there is, okay. Let me explain a little bit better. Then, okay, is that there is still default risk. Okay, now, irrespective of any type of transaction that you do in the financial markets, right? There is a probability of a default risk, okay, or credit risk. Okay, now, and we'll talk more about it in towards the end of level two. But even if, let's say, you're a client and I'm the broker, right? Even if you do an exchange traded transaction, okay, you will still have to deposit collateral with me. Now, can anybody think of why, even if it is, and we're talking about foreign institutional investors, okay, I'm not talking about retail investors here, why will an FII still deposit collateral with the broker? Why do you think they would do that? And I want you guys to think a little bit more broadly. Okay, the answer will not come to you. I mean, if it comes to you, you say it, and let me see whether you got it right or wrong. But you need to think a little bit more broadly and connect the dots. What do you guys think? You can unmute yourself, or you can put in the chat. Do you guys understand my question? Guys, are you there? Okay. So it's to so the question that you asked in that previously, right? So I'm trying to clarify that point. Okay, how is there any default risk? Okay, now my question to all of you is, irrespective of an OTC trade or an exchange trade, clients or institutional investors have to deposit collateral with the broker. Now my question is, why should they? Because if you talk about exchange, what did we say? Did we say there is default risk or there's no default risk? Okay. But Saurabh, the default risk is against who? Yeah, correct. No default risk. But who is there's no default risk against? Is it between client and broker, or is it between client and counterparty that there is no default risk? No, guys, think a little bit more, no? So you just mentioned that there's no default risk against the counterparty because why? You have a clearing house in between. Now, good, Annette. Now, is there anything in between client and broker? Is there a clearing house between client and broker? No, right? So that is why there is default risk between client and broker, and that is why client has to deposit a collateral with the broker, even if it is exchange traded. Okay, even if it is exchange traded, they still have to deposit collateral. Is this clear with everyone? Yeah. So Annette, so when you talk about OTC derivatives, right? You're you filling up the ISDA agreement. Yes, it is just it makes you now the contract between you and your client and counterparty becomes legally it is legally binding. Okay, and you have to fulfill the terms and conditions of that contract. Okay, correct. But even if you sign a document, does that eliminate default risk? No. So for example, if you take a house on rent, you sign the agreement, but on the day you decide to move in, you decide something bad happens and you decide that, okay, you know what, I can't actually move in, and you cancel the rental agreement with your owner. Can anything be done? Right, nothing can be done because default risk is, as the name suggests, you're worried that the counterparty or the client is going to default against you. Okay, so that is why you have to deposit a collateral. Okay, so that's the idea with this. Okay, so you can fill up this create the ISDA agreement. You can sign it, you can draft it, but that does not still eliminate the what do you call it, default risk. Okay, all right, everybody done writing? Okay, does this make sense to everyone in terms of this thing? Is it logical in your head? And please clarify if you don't understand. Okay, exactly, sir. Exactly. Because there is rules and regulations, etc., right, on exchange trade life cycle. So you don't have that affirmation step. And think about it another way, right? Now, if there is any discrepancy between client and broker, we both can go to the stock exchange to find out what are the details of the transaction. But in OTC, because it is bilateral, okay, because it's bilateral, right? We have to do this affirmation step because one of us could have the wrong information. Okay, so are we clear with the OTC trade life cycle in terms of affirmation and trade confirmation? So affirmation is not legally binding. So it's just like a slip, like an email that you're sending with all the trade details. Okay. Then once they say yes, then you're going to send it to your back office team and they're going to draft the ISDA agreement. Okay. Now, like I mentioned before, 10, 15 years ago, even 20 years ago, all of it was done manually and it would take 21 days. But nowadays, because of technology, right, what happens is that you can select the type of agreement that you want. Let's say Ford contract, etc., etc. So you click the right what do you call it combinations, okay, and you hit generate. Then the ISDA agreement gets automatically generated from the system, and it's good to go. Okay, but I hope this is very clear in terms of affirmation and confirmation. And a good example to keep in mind is rental agreements. Okay. All right. Now, I wanted to show you guys an example of ISDA agreement. Okay. Now, it's very and please understand it's very hard to get these kind of information. So this is not necessarily a valid transaction, but the details within this contract, right? The details and language is correct. Okay. All right. Now, what I'm showing you guys is a interest rate swap transaction by two parties, Stratton Oakmont and Leeson's Investment Advisors. Have you guys heard of Stratton Oakmont before? No, no, really? Okay. How many of you watched Wolf of Wall Street? Annette could. Okay. So if you guys have watched Wolf of Wall Street, right? That's the name of the company, Stratton Oakmont. Yeah, long ago. It's not that long ago, is it? I don't know. I don't remember. Yeah. And Leeson's. So the Leeson's. Actually, the guy's actual name is Nick Leeson. There's a movie. So he was one of the first guys. Well, no, I wouldn't say first, but he created a massive incident for one of the oldest banks in the UK. He was a trader in Singapore, front office guy, and he basically hit a lot of fictitious transactions. And when the market went against him, and this was in the late 80s, I forget which company, Bearings, yeah, Bearings Bank, yeah. So Bearings Bank ended up going bankrupt, and they got sold to I think Royal Bank of Scotland for like £1 or something like that. Yeah. So take the names of these two, client and counterparty with a pinch of salt, but the rest of the details, right, is correct. Okay. Now, can all of you see this properly? Okay, let me make it a little bigger. Yeah. Okay. So, and I'll just read out a few of the key things, okay, so that you guys understand why it takes time to create these confirmations and why it is extremely important to do affirmation. Okay, so I'll read this out. The purpose of this letter agreement is to confirm the terms and conditions of the transaction entered into between Stratton Oakmont USA and Leeson's Investment Advisors, the counterparty. on the trade date and identified by Stratton Oakmont USA bank deal number specified below the transaction. This letter agreement constitutes a confirmation as referred to in the master agreement specified below and supersedes any previous confirmation or other writing with respect to the transaction described below. Wow, what does that first sentence say? A lot of information, but what do you think it means? What does it overrule? Saurav, can you give me that specific? Yeah, what did we do before the confirmation? Okay, make any other agreements invalid, correct? But what was the previous one? Affirmation. Yeah. So the affirmation that they sent, it's saying that is not legally binding. Okay. Now please understand. Yeah. So this is what you guys have to learn to connect the dots. Okay. So hang on, where did it go? So why does it say this? And look, when we go through this line by line, right? You're going to understand the importance of communication, okay, especially in the written language, is that you have to be very, very specific, okay? So when you're very specific with what you write, there's not going to be any loopholes, okay? So that's why it says supersedes any previous confirmation or other writing with respect to the transaction described below. So the affirmation, yes, it was sent, but that is not legally binding, because see, tomorrow somebody can say that, hey, I sent on that piece of paper, you no, let's say that we're sitting in a coffee shop, okay, and on a napkin, I jokingly say, you know what, Saurav, I owe you 100 rupees, and I signed and I give it to you, okay. Now what if you added like three zeros, and then because I signed it, isn't it still a legally binding agreement even though it's on a napkin, on a paper napkin? It is, right? Yes, no. So on a napkin, if I say I owe Saurav, let's say 100 rupees, and I sign it, okay, it becomes legally binding. But there's nothing that could stop Saurav from adding a few more zeros, right? And then later on, I could actually get in trouble saying that I owe so much, right? Because my signature is there. So whenever you agree to something, right, you put it down on a piece of paper so that both parties agree to the specifics of the deal, but you should always go to your lawyer to create the agreement. Okay, general rule of thumb. Okay, now let's look at the next paragraph. Now, this is a paragraph, but it's actually got only like two lines. Exactly, it's just an agreement between us. Yeah. Now, the definitions and provisions contained in the 2006 ISDA definitions, as published by ISDA, and the 1998 FX and currency option definitions, as published by ISDA, the Emerging Market Traders Association, and the Foreign Exchange Committee are incorporated into this confirmation. Wow, what does that mean? Yeah. So you have your 2006 ISDA definitions as published by ISDA. You have your 1998 FX and currency option definition as published by ISDA. There are a couple of other associations, Emerging Market Traders Association and Foreign Exchange Committee are incorporated into this confirmation. So what is it trying to say in this first sentence? Take a guess, right? What do you think it's trying to say? Guys, what do you think? Come on, make an attempt. Okay, it's not any random definitions. Okay, so it is specifically saying, okay, that so now for example, this 2006 definitions, right? What are they? So the 2006 definitions are in-depth, step-by-step set of regulations, okay? But that is not included here. So if you want that, you have to download it and you have to read that, okay? So essentially what they're saying is that the terms and conditions of 2006 definitions, the FX definitions, the Emerging Market Traders Association, and the Foreign Exchange Committee, all their terms and conditions are in this confirmation. That's what it's saying, okay? Without it, so it's referring to that but without telling you what they are, okay. Now look at the next line is in the event of any inconsistency between the 2006 definition and the FX definition, the 2006 definition shall govern. What do you think this means? The highlighted this thing. Good. Now if there is a discrepancy between 2006 and FX definitions will not hold any value and only 2006 definition. Okay. Now it says the next half of the line is except that the FX definition shall govern for the purposes of the settlement provisions set out below. Now, if there is a discrepancy or an issue with settling the process, settling the transaction, right? Then you're going to have to use FX definitions. Okay, is this clear with everyone? So you don't have to memorize it, but I'm trying to tell you how detailed these agreements are. Okay, and look at the last line. It says that in the event of any inconsistency between the definition and this confirmation will govern. Right? So at the end of it all, even if there's a discrepancy between the definitions and this confirmation will be the one that has the most value or will be referred to. Okay, is this idea like, are you guys getting the idea? Like, I don't mean to confuse you guys, but are you guys seeing the importance of being very specific in your communication? Because these are all legally binding documents, and if you don't get the legality correct, right, there could be a possibility that your counterparty could actually run away from the transaction because they found a loop. Yeah. All right. So the first page is what we call as a preamble. So we won't go through all of it, right? So there's certain things that I want to. So first page is what we call the preamble. Now look at this. Second page gives us the details of the transaction: trade date, effective date, termination date, fixed rate is stratum upon the notional value is USD 100 million. Now fixed rate is 7.5%. Then fixed rate day count convention is 30 by 360. You guys remember we talked about all of this, right? And the payment period is 1st April and 1st October of every year. Is so what is this? This is basically the details of the transaction. Is this okay with everyone? A lot of people are leaving, I think getting bored. Now, let me ask you guys one question. What are the different types of interest rate swaps? What are the different types of interest rate swaps? Okay. Everybody else can hear me? Okay, but I don't have any issue on my side here. Okay, quickly log out and log in quickly. If now everybody can hear you. Sorry, hear me, not you. Can everybody hear me now? Can you hear me now, guys? Okay, cool. Okay, I was wondering what happened. Okay, cool. All right. So my question is, okay. First of all, I don't know where we lost each other, but is this part clear? Right? Is that the language has to be very specific? Okay, the language has to be very specific, and because these are legally binding documents, okay, you can't have any loopholes in them. Okay. Now, the next page has the details of the transaction. Okay. Now, since it's an interest rate swap contract, what are the different types of interest rate swaps can we have? Can anyone tell me? No, yeah, correct. In terms of interest rate swap, this thing is you have a fixed versus floating and a floating versus floating, right? Now, my question to you guys is, can we have a fixed versus fixed? Can we have a fixed versus fixed interest rate swap contract? Okay, so there's a no. Okay, okay, any kind. Okay, any other answer? Okay, any kind of contract is possible. So you're saying yes then, Saurav? Right, that's one and one. What about the rest? Can we have a fixed versus fixed interest rate swap? Okay, I don't think so. All right. Now let's look at the details of this transaction. Okay, so notional value is USD 100 million. Fixed rate is 7.5%. DCC is 30 by 360, 1st April and 1st October. Okay. Now here's the interesting thing. Hang on. If you look at the counterparty, they are on a different currency, BRL, Brazilian lira, and they're also on a fixed rate of 9.08. Now, this guy here is on USD 100 million, but 7.5% fixed rate, and this guy is on BRL 176 million with 9.08%. Now, my question is, if both are on fixed, but they have different currencies, what are they actually doing? What are they actually speculating on? Because if you look at this, right, what is the first word in the settlement provisions? What is this? NDF. Yes. So, here's the interesting thing about financial markets. Agreed, this is an interest rate swap contract. Okay, both are on fixed, but they're actually speculating on the exchange rate between USD and BRL. Yes, it is beautiful. Of structured finance, yes. Now here's the thing, right? So you have your fixed dates, 1st April, 1st October, everything is fine. Now, if you look at the settlement provisions, right? It's saying non-deliverable. It's non-deliverable. Yeah, and it's BRL is NDF. Okay, with the effect that any, hang on, let me expand it for that. That any reference currency amounts payable hereunder on a payment date shall be converted into a settlement currency amounts by reference to a settlement rate option on the applicable valuation date. All payments hereunder shall be made in the settlement currency. So reference currency is BRL, settlement currency is USD. So the counterparty, leasing advisors, right? They're going to convert their BRL payment to a US dollar. Okay, so that's what's happening on this settlement provisions. Okay, now if you look at this, see again, there is no exchange, there is no clearinghouse. Okay, it actually tells us, okay, if there is a disruption in the market, see the primary rate that you're going to use is what we call as BRL09. Okay, basically that's the reference rate. Okay, but if BRL9 is down, you can use BRL12, or you can use BRL 13, okay, as the case may be. Okay, so it details out in case there is any issue. Now, if there's any unscheduled holiday, if there's any problems, right, the agreement will take care of it. Now, now are you understanding why it has to be so in depth? Why it's going to take you a couple of days to create these agreements is because if tomorrow there is an issue with the settlement of this transaction and the ISDA agreement does not cover it, right? Then the counterparty or the client can refuse to pay you. And at that time, you're going to get in big trouble. Okay? Is this clear with everyone? I mean, I'm not going to go through the entire document, but hang on. Let me just show you this. So, first page is what we call the preamble. Second page is the transaction details. Okay? Then the settlement provisions. Okay, disruption events, fallback plans, everything. Okay, and the rest of the terms and conditions. So we won't go through all of it. Okay, uh, so for example, let's say that there's a delay in paying. Okay, what is the maximum number of days that can be postponed to make the payment? 30 calendar days. Okay, um, so everything is detailed out. Okay, and then hang on. And then finally, if you look at this, right, both parties will sign the document. Okay, both parties. Now, can you guys tell me who is going to sign this document? Is it going to be you who's working in back office, or is it somebody in front office who's going to sign the ISDA agreement? Okay, one person for back office. What about the others? Back office. Okay, back office. Okay, so let me clarify one thing. Okay, see, when we talk about any sort of deal that happens, right? That deal is taken by the front office person and they're the ones who have agreed to take this risk on behalf of the company. Okay, but you sitting in back office or middle office, your job is not to take the risk for the company. Your job is to look at the settlement risk or to make sure that the payments happen or client doesn't pay or validation not being done properly, etc. That is your responsibility. Okay, but it cannot be a back office person who signs the deal. Okay, nothing about this way. Let's say that, so for example, right, this week Reliance again got an investment from, I think, Intel, right? Intel or something. Okay. Now, who should sign that agreement? Should the CEOs of Reliance and Intel sign it, or should it be the security guard? Yeah, Intel Capital. Yeah, or should it be the security guard who signs the document? No doubt that the security guard's life is also impacted, but was he or she directly involved in this transaction? No. Okay. Yeah. So please be clear is that you are not supposed to sign these transactions. Okay. It's the role of the front office person to do that. Okay. So this, my friends, is how a is the agreement looks like. Okay. Okay. Any questions on this? Yes. No. Okay. I will stop your recording because we're done for the day.